right, so it's 7 o'clock now, so I think we'll get started, and I'll still let people on as we go. So welcome everybody to the RAIC Syllabus Work Experience webinar. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be available on our website later on. Also, if you have any questions or comments or anything that you want to address during the webinar, feel free to put them into the chat box on the bottom right. Your microphones have been muted, so you won't be able to talk during this, and that's just so that we don't have any interference or anything like that during the webinar. Another quick housekeeping item is that I will be running the webinar. Dawn is sick right now and can't talk very well.
Don't say I'm sick. That just makes me sound so feeble.
No. So I will be hosting the webinar for the majority of it, and Dawn will participate where he can and or correct me if I'm wrong. So we'll get through it. But we're really glad to have everybody on board here, and we're looking forward to having a good discussion about work experience requirements in the syllabus program. So welcome. All right. So getting started, the agenda for tonight is actually, looks like this. The RAIC Syllabus Work Experience Requirements. I'm going to do a quick overview. We're going to go over and show you a link to the Architectural Experience Manual that's on our website. We're going to go over the basic roles and responsibilities of the student, the mentor, and the supervisor. We're going to look at the Canadian Experience Record Book requirements and submission processes. And Don will definitely go over his review process of the CERB submissions and what he looks for in a good submission. And we'll just briefly talk about the submission and enforcement of the Architectural Experience Policy. So generally, as you know, you may have seen the curriculum sequence chart, or I hope you have. So Syllabus is based on the apprenticeship model and combines the academic requirements and work experience requirements, as you know. And if you look on the curriculum sequence chart, you see right there on the bottom is the work experience. And that shows exactly a little timeline and the requirements or what has to be done in each part of the syllabus program. So you can see in Part 2 and Part 3, you have to be employed under the supervision of a Canadian licensed architect. And in Part 2, you're looking to achieve a minimum of 2,800 hours. And in Part 3, it's 7,000 hours, and that's the minimum. And you still need to follow the CERB requirements as per the items that you have to put in.
The 15 categories, you mean, right?
Dawn, the categories. Thank you, Dawn. Dawn would like me to point out where you can find the chart. If you go onto the RAIC Syllabus website and go under the, just go under the curriculum sequence chart under programs, and there's a link to the sequence chart there. And if anybody has any issues with getting a hold of it, I'm happy to show you or send you an email with that. Great. So basically here, I just wanted to go over, we've given you a little bit of a timeline or a process. We get a lot of questions about what are the steps, what are the requirements of work experience. And while we can't give you a detailed timeline as per your CALA jurisdiction, we can give you just a little summary, a little idea of the basic idea of what comes when and how the process works. So what you're looking at here is everything in orange is the general requirements of each part. So you've got Part 1, 2, and 3, and the minimum requirements in there. And the items in green are the achievements of each part, so your certificates of completion and your diploma after each part. And the items in blue are the required submission documents. So you're actually looking at submitting the mentor form and the employer form in Part 1 right before you get into Part 2. And then in Part 2 and 3, you're submitting your CERBs every 900 to 1,000 hours. The gray sections of this show the optional or the sometimes required items. So for example, back-entered work experience hours are submitted during Part 1 up to before you start Part 2. And your change of employment forms are submitted when you have a change in employment. Dawn sending a question here. Thank you very much, Dawn. He gave me the link, so I'll put that in the general chat. Thank you, Dawn. And I have a couple of questions. I'll just address 7,000 hours required while you're in Part 3, correct? Yes, KMAT, that is correct. And what if completing Part 3 coursework only takes 2 years? You still have to fulfill the work experience requirements as well as it's outlined. So if you finish all your courses and you still have work experience to complete, you need to also complete the work experience before you would be given your diploma. Okay. So a really basic, quick overview of the work experience requirements for the syllabus program. So students are required to seek and obtain work experience while they're registered in the program. So you are required to be working part-time or full-time, depending on the part of the program. The total is 9,800 hours of work experience in 3 major categories and 15 subcategories. Those major categories are design and construction documents, contract admin, and management. And there's no limit on the amount of overtime architectural experience that one can accumulate. So if you finish off a category, you can still be accumulating hours in that category and submitting it. And to kind of come back to that idea of what's required in each part. In Part 2, as I said, it was 2,000 hours is the minimum total number of hours that you achieve in Part 2, and 7,800. Did I say 7th? Oh, I've got those mixed up. It's 2,800 and 7,000. Sorry, I'll fix that slide before I post it. So it's 7,000 hours in Part 3 and 2,800 hours in Part 2. Typo. So no work experience is required in Part 1 of the syllabus program. However, students may back enter up to 4,900 hours of work experience that's gained immediately prior to entering Part 2 of the program. And what happens is when you give us the 4,900 hours to review, 2,450 is put towards your Part 2 requirements and 2,450 is put towards your Part 3 requirements. On completion of the professional diploma in architecture, the student must have their education certified by the CACB and then contact their CALA jurisdiction to review work experience hours and complete internship requirements. So as I was mentioning, you do have to follow the requirements of syllabus and your CALA jurisdiction. So what's going to happen is when you get your professional diploma, you do have to fulfill with your CALA jurisdiction any additional work experience requirements or internship requirements that they say. Andrea, hello. I understand that the main hours is 9,800s. However, my CRB log page is showing 7,370. Could you clarify? Yes. So that is just the online, and that's just a simple glitch with our system right now. It should say 9,800. So if you're downloading the CERB forms, you can still keep putting it. Does it say 9,800 on the actual form, Dawn?
It says 9,800 on the Excel spreadsheet summaries, but I think it is mathematically incorrect in the online portal, and we need to correct it. But that comes with some of the other corrections we need to make.
Yeah, so it is showing that 7370, Andrea, and that is just a calculation error. So it should be doing 9,800 the total, and that is posted on our website and put in the architectural experience manual.
Wait, the reason that there's a difference is because in each of the 15 categories, there is a minimum number of hours. But those minimum number of hours don't add up to the 9,800. So the difference between 7,370 and 9,800 can be accrued in any of the 15 categories.
Yeah. And if you have further questions about that, you're welcome to email Dawn or myself about it too. So just moving on from there and continuing the work experience requirements, the requirements for logging experience and qualifying hours can vary slightly from province to province or in your CALA jurisdiction. So as I said, please make sure that you are checking with your provincial regulator on what the requirements are. Syllabus has its own set of requirements, but there may be slight differences from province to province. Hi, Vicky. Yes, we will go over the 5340 in a second. So it's the student's responsibility to contact the regulator, as I said, and make sure that they are meeting all the requirements for acceptance into the internship programs. And as noted here, we want to make sure that you are contacting them, because we don't want to have a situation where you're given your professional diploma and then you're not qualifying in a particular jurisdiction because you haven't reached out ahead of time to make sure that you've accumulated what they require.
Just to give an example, some of the regulators place a limit on the number of hours that you can acquire while working in a public sector organization. And some of the regulators want you to accumulate hours after you graduate from syllabus, even though you have a 9800. So the regulators are a little different, although they all comply with the intern architect's program. There are variations, and each student has to confirm with your provincial regulator what their requirements are. We just don't want a student to finish syllabus and think that just because they finished syllabus, they must have satisfied their CALA requirements. That is not the case. And each regulator can change those regulations, and they may not tell us. So you need to confirm with your CALA regulator what their requirements for syllabus students are.
Thanks, Don. So touching on what you were asking there, Vicky, so yes, there are grandfathered students who may fall under the previous work experience requirements of syllabus. So students who have completed more than half of the required courses under Part 2, or who have completed Part 2 altogether by August 2013, will be grandfathered under the pre-2013 work experience model and are required to complete 5,340 hours in total, with a minimum hour requirements in each of the 15 categories. Now, I've reached out to pretty much everybody that falls under this total. So if I haven't spoken to you about it, if you're concerned about it or want to review, I'm happy to go over your academic work as well as your work experience and see if you are fitting into the 5340 hour category or the 9800 hour category. So the Architectural Experience Manual, there's a link here. So every student is responsible for reading the manual. Pretty much everything that we will be going over tonight is in the Architectural Experience Manual, and it's actually just been recently updated to put in the stuff, everything about uploading your CERBs to the student portal. Thank you, Don. So basically, just make sure that you're reading the manual. If you have any questions about work experience requirements, read the manual first, see if you can find the answer in there, and then reach out to me about that as well. So just going over the roles and responsibilities of the key players in the program and your learning experience. The role of the student. The student's responsibility is to adhere to the work experience requirements of the RAIC syllabus program. So that includes reading the manual and following along any of our policies online. You're responsible for discussing requirements with your provincial regulator as well. So that's what we mentioned before. Please reach out to your CALA jurisdiction representatives, your provincial regulator, and talk to them about the requirements. You are responsible for securing your own appropriate employment in order to fulfill the work experience requirements. We don't help with job placement or anything else, so you are required to find the right work experience that will fulfill all the requirements. It is also the student's responsibility to find an appropriate mentor and meet with them as per the Architectural Experience Manual. So different ways you can reach out to different kinds of people and find mentors and things. We recommend you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to your studio coordinator, you can talk to other students, and just look around and see if you can find anyone that you work with well in the mentor capacity. I believe if you're in the different provincial regulators, sometimes have postings or anything, or they provide a list of people who are interested in being mentors. So sometimes you can reach out to the CALA jurisdiction and ask them about that as well. Sorry, Don, did you have something to add?
Yes. If you're in a city that has a local society of architects, attend their dinners and events, and you're quite likely to meet somebody who may offer to be a mentor. Just announce yourself, tell people I'm a syllabus student, I'm looking for a mentor, and that's probably the best place to find a whole group of architects all together at the same time. And they might be able to provide a mentor, or they'll connect you with somebody they know who could be a mentor. So your local Society of Architects events are a good source for finding mentors.
Yeah. So final couple of items that are the student's responsibility are to submit your required forms on time, and to submit your complete and concise copies of your SERBs every 900 to 1,000 hours. Aaron had a question. As per page 2 of the Architectural Experience Manual, we require a full-time work with a minimum 20 working hours or eligible working experience. I would have to read that passage, Aaron. However, what I believe you're referring to is that you are required to have work experience through and be employed while in the program. In part 2 of the program, you can be working part-time, which is the equivalent of 20 hours a week. And in part 3, it's a minimum of 40 hours a week, so full-time. But if you have further questions on that, let me know if I didn't answer it. So the role of the supervisor. So the supervisor is an architect within the architectural practice or eligible employment situation who personally supervises and directs the students. So this is somebody who...
Bryn, can I just come back to Aaron's point? I'm just reading the experience manual now, and okay, it does say a minimum average 20 hours per week for both parts 2 and part 3. It's not 40. It's a minimum average 20 hours per week for both parts 2 and part 3.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that, Don. Oh, somebody's... 1 second. Oh, sorry. KMAT. Does that make you what if your company considers 30 full-time as 35 hours? So as Don was just saying, it's that average, so you're fine.
Yeah, it's what we consider to be full-time, to be in the syllabus program. So if you're working at least 20 hours a week, we consider that qualifying for the purposes of the syllabus program.
Yeah. And again, everybody has a little bit of a different, unique situation. So if you do have specific questions, I'm totally happy to answer those, or Dawn can answer those in an email afterwards as well. We're happy to answer questions now, but just if you want further clarifications or any issues, just let us know later as well. One more question here. What if the backlogged hours are more than 900 to 1,000 from the start? I'm not sure I understand. Yeah, so you can backlog up to 90.
I understand what Radomir is saying. Okay. If you have several thousand hours of experience, when you enter the syllabus program, you can log all of those hours. You take all of those hours and put them into your experience book and submit that as backlogged hours. You can submit up to 4,900 backlogged hours. We do have students who enter the program who have already been working for several years and have lots of experience. And so we accept those backlogged hours.
Yeah, and we have a slide, so we will review some of the requirements for the back-entered hours in a minute as well. I'll just answer Aaron's question here. So for example, say I can't get eligible experience a week but I am working in an office for 40, I am okay. So, for example, you can't get the minimum 20 hours a week of eligible experience, but I'm still working 40 hours. Yes, so you do need to be working the minimum hours a week of eligible experience. Yeah, so not all of your hours might be eligible in a firm too. I think that's correct, Dawn, that as long as they're working in the firm supervised by an architect, that's the important part. You might not be putting all of the eligible experience in, but feel free to correct me there.
I'm not clear what it is that Aaron is saying. He says, for example, I cannot get the minimum 20 hours per week of eligible experience, but I'm still working 40 hours. I don't quite understand that. Aaron, could you please explain what you mean?
Let me see. I can probably give Aaron... Aaron, do you have a microphone that I can enable? Okay.
Okay. If Aaron could just type it in, I'm just not clear what it is he's saying.
Yeah. Okay. And then Vicky, so in my case, I think that I have outstanding hours of approximately 30 hours. Do I need to work full time then? Okay, Vicky. So, Vicky, we'll take your question offline if that's okay with you, and we'll review your work experience hours and everything completely offline if that works. Thanks. So I'm just going to go through the role of the supervisor here really quickly, just to give Aaron a chance. If you would like Aaron to submit your question again, we're not quite understanding, and we're also happy to take it offline too if you want to give myself or Dawn a call later too. So
if somebody has a personal situation they want to discuss and they don't want the whole class to see it, is please give Bryn a phone call, or when I have a voice back, give me a phone call, and we'll try to address your situation.
Absolutely. So just to continue on the role of the supervisor for a minute here, again, the supervisor must be somebody in your place of employment and who is directly supervising you, and it should be a licensed architect in your CALA jurisdiction, so in the province in which you want to be licensed. So an architect with a license to practice in a provincial or territorial jurisdiction. So it may be an architect employed by a holder of a license to practice, maybe licensed architect working in the public sector. It may not be a retired architect, so that is a question we get, and we can review that in a second. It may not be an engineer, an interior designer, or a construction contractor. So just to clarify that.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that first point. When I said maybe an architect employed by a holder of a license to practice. In some provinces, licensure is a single stage, so as soon as you become registered, you can practice. In some provinces, it's a two-stage. You can become a registered architect, but you then have to get a license to practice. So it's like you can become an architect, and then you have to get a business license as well. It's a two-stage thing. So you can have a supervisor who is an employee of a licensed an architect with a license to practice. The supervisor doesn't have to be the holder of the license. It can be a registered architect who's working for another architect who has the license to practice. If you're in a company such as Dialogue or Kasian or IBI or Stantec, there are many, many architects working in those firms who are not the holder, but they're registered and they can be your supervisor.
There you go. Thanks, Dawn. So the role of the mentor. So a mentor in the syllabus program is mandatory, and it may be required by your CALA jurisdiction. So an architect, it cannot be an architect who is employed by your firm. So it needs to be somebody outside of where you work. You need to meet with them at least 3 times a year, and at least every time you're looking to submit your CERB, every 900 to 1,000 hours. And I believe the mentor can be a retired architect. Is that right, Don?
That's correct, as long as they are still a member of their provincial association.
Yeah, so while your supervisor can't be a retired architect, your mentor can be, as long as they're still registered with their association.
As long as they're still a member.
A member, sorry, not registered.
Now, there's something I have to check here, and I'll admit this is something I hadn't thought of. If you were in a very large firm, like Stantec or Kasian or Dialogue, I am unsure whether your mentor can be working in that firm, but be in a completely different division, and so in fact, you never come into contact or come across them in your daily work experience. I'm not sure whether that counts. That's something that I'll have to read in more detail and check as to whether or not the architect can work in the same firm, but they cannot be a supervisor. They can't be a part of your daily work experience. Because we do have some very, very large firms in Canada, it may be the case, but that's something we'll have to check.
I'll check on that. According to the manual, I believe it says that they can't be employed at the student's place of employment, but it is a question of whether or not they work in the same office location itself versus maybe somebody who's not in the same exact spot that you are. All right. Oh, yes, the mentor may be a retired architect who maintains their membership. There you go.
Just to clarify that last point, although your mentor may be a retired architect, we do not require that retired architect has a license of practice if you are in a province that has the two-stage system. As long as they are still registered and with their provincial association, that's fine.
Thank you, Don. So the role of the RAIC, or the RAIC Syllabus Office, that would be Don and myself, basically. So the role of the registrar is to collect the CERBs and maintain a log of work experience. And I also advise the students of their CERB submissions are late or when things are due. Now, make sure that you're submitting things on time and make sure that you're submitting things so that I don't have to remind you when they're late, though, too. The director's responsibility is to review the student work experience and the CERBs and to update the CERB log and provide a summary and recommendations to the students upon review. Okay, Matt, do we need to submit proof that we've met with our mentor 3 times a year? The proof is basically in the signature on the CERB submission.
Each student should keep notes of their meeting with their mentor. You should keep notes of that meeting. That's important. I would recommend you keep a sketchbook, and you put these notes right in your sketchbook, so you always have those notes. We do not technically require those notes. However, if there were ever an issue, if during the process of you becoming an intern, there was a question about your experience, it was questioned, you would have your notes to show that you met with your mentor on all of these occasions and complied with the syllabus program requirements. So you should keep notes of all of those meetings.
Thanks, Don. So looking at the Canadian Experience Record Book, or the CERB, an overview of that is that just to say that copies of duly completed CERB sections are to be uploaded on the student portal every 900 to 1,000 hours. And I know that this is a little bit of a new process for some of you, so if you do have any issues with uploading to the student portal, please let me know. I'm happy to walk you through it and let you know how that works. So we don't accept them by email anymore unless it's some different circumstance or the student portal is not working or something. But to my knowledge, it seems to be working fine. So please submit them online and they will go in the queue for review. Your CERBs should be submitted within 8 weeks of the last date of entry on the log. Failure to submit will result in late fees and a review of your student's status. So students can be suspended if they're continually submitting late or it's about 36 months past. CRBs are then reviewed by the director once they're submitted, and Don makes every effort to get you back your comments and log as soon as he can.
I'd just like to point out, it is important for both you and your CALA regulator to know that your experience logs, each individual log is reviewed by myself, a registered architect. Okay, they are not reviewed by non-architects, they are reviewed by architects, as would any CALA books be reviewed of an intern. They're reviewed by architects. So we follow a similar process at Syllabus as a regulator does in reviewing intern books.
All right, so continuing through the overview. So as I said, once reviewed, the director may send a review summary that would include your CERB log as well as comments about what you submitted. In the early years of experience, review will be sent if the director finds something of note in the experience log. In later years, reviews may become more frequent. So Don, do you want to explain that a little bit for yourself?
Yes, in the early years, students are gathering experience and they're working on maybe one building type. There's still years of experience to be accumulated. And so, for example, there isn't much point if a student has been working for 18 months and all they've done is custom residential, I probably will not comment that they need to get more different occupancies because there's still a very long way to go. If the student is approaching the 2/3 point of their experience or the 3/4 point of their experience and they still have done nothing other than custom residential, and maybe they have never done a public tender, and or they are completely missing project management skills, then I will write a note to them indicating that they need to discuss with their employer how they can get the experience in which they're deficient, or how they can obtain working in occupancies. Now, we can have trouble, and interns in every province have the same problem. And that is, they can say, well, I work in a firm and it's all contract or construction management, or I work in a firm that predominantly does custom residential. We don't get into institutional. We don't get into commercial. And they think that this can just be waived because it's not what my firm does. It should just be waived. We don't have the power to waive the requirements of the intern architects program. They are established by the members of CALA. They are administered by the CACB. And the syllabus program cannot waive those requirements. What we don't want is for you to finish the syllabus program and for some reason a CALA jurisdiction does not accept the experience that you have accumulated during syllabus. So this is why we will make notes, and it's often because the office that a student is working in does not do a particular kind of process, or the student is not allowed to become a part of what the principal does, such as marketing or something like that. And so it leaves the student deficient in certain categories. We really don't have any choice but to advise the student that they need to find that kind of experience. We cannot waive the requirements because your firm doesn't do a certain thing.
Thanks, Don. So originals also need to be submitted to your CALA jurisdiction as required. You must complete the required hours in each category, not just the overall minimum total hours. So that's an important point. Please note that just because you've reached the 9,800 hours of required work experience, if you have not met the minimum requirements of a certain category, we will still require that you keep submitting and get that experience in that category. The experience must satisfy the required hours and must include a variety of occupancies, minimum of 4, project types, complexities, and sizes. So that's what Dawn was just mentioning there, that if a student is having trouble in the firm where they are getting that experience, you must seek out that experience in whatever way that you need to. So backlogged work experience hours, we had a question about this as well. So just to go over that quickly, a syllabus student may record up to 7 continuous years of Canadian architectural experience acquired immediately prior to becoming a student and throughout Part 1 studies. It must be signed by an architect or supervisor. It does not need to be signed by a mentor because you probably don't have a mentor if you gained that experience right before coming into the program. But it does have to be signed by the supervisor. It's what you can accumulate is a maximum of 4,900 hours of experience, and it's applied half to Part 2 and half to Part 3, so 2,450 hours in Part 2 and 2,450 hours in Part 3. And it must be submitted at the beginning of Part 2. That's important. The question here from KMAT, I just got my first 900 hours approved. If there are any notes made by you, Dawn, where would I see them? So thanks for that question. So when Dawn reviews it online, it gets sent online and he will mark it as approved if it's approved or rejected if it's rejected. And then he will send an email with your log and with comments after the review.
No, if it's done through this, if the student requires the 9,800 hours, I don't send them an Excel spreadsheet log. Okay?
Right.
They get that on the portal. If the student is on the 5340 hours, then I keep an Excel spreadsheet. I create a PDF copy and I email it to them. But if I have comments to a student, they would receive them in a personal email.
There you go. And what is the definition of continuous? Example, I took an extended holiday at one point during the last 7 years. I assume that's in reference to the backlogged hours. So
I think it means calendar years.
Yeah.
Not experience years, calendar years. If you took an extended leave during those 7 years, for example, this is, if a student were starting right now, this is 2019, we would be looking for experience hours acquired after 2012.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of step-by-step instructions for completion of your CERB, once you've reached that 900 to 1,000 hours of experience, or approximately 6 months, or at the change of employment, you must submit the signed and dated and certified CERB online through the student portal. The student is required to sign and date each page of the CERB as indicated. The supervisor completes the comments and declaration portion and signs and dates where appropriate. And the mentor, if applicable, if it's not backlogged hours, completes the mentor declaration portion and signs and dates as well. Once the CERB is completed, please submit it online through the student portal, and that goes, I get an email notifying me that it's there, and Dawn gets an email notifying him that it's there, and please make sure that's within 8 weeks of the last date of entry. Submit the original to your CALA jurisdiction, and retain a copy for your own records as well.
Now, about submitting to your CALA jurisdiction. I cannot speak for all of the provinces, but I know that some of them will accept your books, but they will not review them. They simply take them and archive them. And then when you apply to be an intern, they pull them out and then they review them. So even though you submit your book, they do not do anything with it other than hold it pending your application for internship. I can't speak for all of them. I only know that some of them do that.
So it's important that you keep a record for yourself. Can I submit all backlogged hours, 4,900 hours, in one CRB? Don, do you prefer them in the all together, or do you want them broken up?
Okay, what determines this is each CRB is based on 10 projects. So you can put on, if you keep copying the project description pages, the project listing page, and the experience hours pages, the maximum number of projects you can put on those 3 pages together is 10 projects. It's perfectly fine if you want to submit those 3 pages 10 times over. If you've got 100 projects, that's perfectly fine. But there are only 10 projects per those 3 sheets: the description page, the hours page, and the project list and statistics page. Those 3 pages go together. And so you'd fill in the first 10, you would photocopy those 3 pages, fill in the next 10, fill in the next 10, fill in the next 10, and you would package those under the cover sheet and under your supervisor's signature page at the back. And that's acceptable. But I don't want to see more than the 10 projects on a single set of 3 pages. I don't want to see a consolidation of like 5 projects as talked about as one project. For example, saying, 5 custom homes. No, I want to see each project as a project. That's the way your timesheets should be in your office. Each project is a separate project.
Thanks, Don. So Don's going to go over this in a little more detail, but basically the steps of the CRB review process are that the syllabus director reviews it, he looks for signatures, reviews for the descriptions of each submitted project, reviews supervising architect's comments, reviews the log, and then reviews the experience summary. And Don, if you want to go through some of these.
One of the first things I do is to look at and say, is this a complete book? Does it have all the signatures? If it doesn't, I will send it back and say, you need to get the signatures. That's step 1. Is it a complete book? The next thing is I look at the project descriptions. I look to see what is the scope of the project, the occupancy, what type of construction is it. If there's a particular, that should be maybe 2 to 4 sentences at the most. If there are particular challenges, 1 or 2 sentences just saying what the challenges are. And then you should describe your contribution to the project. And it's best done if you list your contribution, and you could do this in a bullet list, reflecting the 15 categories. So if you did design development, code research, building costing, and construction documents, you would list those 4 things. It's not the hours here, but you would list the role that you played in the project. I did the construction documents and specs, etc. Then I look at the diversity of occupancy types. If I see a book and it is entirely industrial buildings, entirely custom residential, entirely high-rise condo, I may go back and look at a previous book and see, was that just the same? Are we seeing a diversity of occupancy types? If I'm seeing no diversity of occupancy types, and this occurs over 1 or 2 books, I can have a concern. And this would be something I would put in a note back to you. I look at the supervising architect's comments, and I like to see that the supervising architect's comments are aligned with where it appears the student is in their learning path. do the comments reflect what the student is actually doing? The student could, for example, say, I worked on this, this, and this, and giving the indication that they had lots of responsibility, and the supervising architect's description is a little different. So it's good to see a consistency between what the student is saying their level of responsibility is and what the supervising architect says it is. Then we have the hours logged. I look at the hours log and I reflect on what you said you did on the project, and I like to see that the hours that you're putting in for the project are realistic compared to how you've described it. For example, if you say I did schematic design and design development, but then you got 400 hours of working drawings and you didn't say anything about it in the description, that's going to give me a little concern. So I like to see that what you describe as responsibilities is reflected in the hours themselves. Yeah, again, the experience summary. Are there categories? This is what I'm looking at. Are there categories of practice in which the student has no experience logged in several books? This is a concern. If the student, we have students who have thousands of hours and have never done a tender, thousands of hours and have never been on site. These are concerning to me. It means that the student is either very specialized and the office values what they can do and they want them to keep doing it, or maybe the student has no inclination to go out on site. But it's important that you accumulate the hours in all of the categories. Now, job shadowing is acceptable. For example, if the principal doesn't think that you're ready to be put out on the site alone, ask that you accompany an experienced employee who does site review and go with them to the site. And what you can do is prepare your own shadow report, your own field review report. And that senior employee can look at it and comment on it and tell you about it. Those hours are quite acceptable if you are job shadowing somebody else. In a small office, you might not have the experience to be allowed to do something completely on your own. But job shadowing is fine. I also look at the occupant, as I've said before, that you have a diversity of occupancies.
Dawn, there's just a quick question here from Joel. Is there any issue for the backlogged hours if the supervising architect has since retired?
As long as that person was the supervising architect when you worked for them and they know your work, I consider that to be acceptable. Maybe they're not a member of the association anymore, but at the time that you were employed by them, and at the time they were supervising you, they were a registered architect with a license to practice. For me, that's acceptable. You would have to confirm that with your CALA member, but I consider that acceptable because at the time they were a registered architect.
Thanks.
You do need to go back and get their signature, though. You need to find them and get them to sign the book. It's not acceptable that somebody signs the book who has no direct knowledge of what you did at that time.
Yeah, so you still need to go and get that. So the last bit here, we're just going to quickly go over the submission and enforcement of architectural experience policy. So this policy came into effect September 1st, 2017. So in this policy, just to kind of go over it quickly, students must submit the SERBs every 900 to 1,000 hours and within 8 weeks of the last date of entry. Failure to submit completed SERBs on time will result in the charge of a late submission fee. So if you haven't submitted books on time, and I've sent you a reminder about this, I'm usually also sending you a manual payment form at the same time. and you will be required to submit the late fee in the manual payment form once you upload those books.
I'd just like to add here. Oh, sorry. If I can just add, this is the same policy that many of the members of CALA have. It's the same late fines. It's the same 900 to 1,000 hours. It's the same 8 weeks. This is the same policy that CALA members have.
Yeah. Submission of more than 1,000 hours will also result in the charging of a late submission fee. Now, I know that some people submit, maybe 1,005 hours or something like that. But if you're continually submitting, 2,000 hours at a time or something like that, we will be looking for that late submission fee for sure. So, quick question. Can you clarify the fee for more than 1,000 hours only applies to current SIR books, not to backdated? Yeah, it doesn't work for the backdated work experience. You can submit the 4,900 hours as long as it's submitted as soon as you get into Part 2 or right before start Part 2. So continuing on with the policy, the experience hours are submitted more than 3 years or 36 months past the date of the last entry will result in immediate student suspension. So if you are getting an email from me and you haven't been submitting your books for the past 3 years, you will no longer be allowed to take any studio courses. Your account will be suspended until you submit those books. Suspension of the students for non-compliance with experience book submissions of over 3 years came into effect on January 1st, 2018. So we have given plenty of reminders and individually contacted everybody. So you should be fully aware of this policy. If you need to read the policy, there is a link there in the slide, and when you get this, it's available on our website, and when you get this presentation, you can click on this link too if you need to find it. Sorry, sorry, Doug.
I'd like to explain a little bit about why this exists this way. Employment in an architecture office of the syllabus program is not an add-on. It's not a luxury. It is integral to your educational experience. If you were going to university, you would be working in a design studio with other students, and you would be in a learning environment where ideas are exchanged, where people are designing together, working together, either on individual projects or group projects. When you're in the syllabus program, of course, you don't have the benefit of working in a design studio as a university student would. The replacement for that is that you're working in an architect's office. And so working in an office is critical to the educational experience. Okay, now to give you an idea of where does the syllabus program come from, if you were to take the older 5-year undergraduate professional degree, which is the degree that I graduated from over 25 years ago, if you were to take that 5-year degree, take out all of the electives in that program and have only the required core courses, and replace all of the electives with work experience, that's the syllabus experience. So your mandatory theory, history, technical, and professional practice courses, on top of your 9 design studio courses and your work experience, is like doing the old 5-year degree with the electives replaced with work experience. Now, clearly, it's a lot more work experience than you would if you were taking the electives, but that's the way the syllabus program is set up. So employment in the syllabus program is not an option. It's integral to your learning experience.
So Donna is just conversing in the chat box too with KMAT. There was a concern just about submission of those backlogged hours, and we are stating that you do need to submit those backlogged hours right before or just as you're going into Part 2 of the program. And there was a question of whether they're in Part 2 now, can they still submit the backlogged hours? Ideally, you're submitting them right before starting Part 2 or right at that point of being in Part 2. So you can reach out to me individually about that, and we'll get that submitted as soon as possible if you're going to be doing that. We need to be reviewing your backlogged hours before we're starting to review those regular 900 to 1,000 hours. Okay, so our last bit here is the Q&A. So that's it for our presentation of the work experience webinar. If anybody has any more questions, Dawn and I are happy to answer them now. I know you asked questions throughout the webinar, which was great. But if you do have any more questions, we're happy to go over that now. Otherwise, we are still available by email and phone if you want to get in contact with us about individual issues, questions, anything in regards to work experience.
I think it's safe to say Bryn will be happy to answer them, and I will struggle through them.
Yes. Wait for a couple more people here to type in questions, maybe.
If I can say something about the backlogged hours in Part 2. We want every student to succeed. We do not want to think a student can't succeed because of a policy. We want to work with you. We need the policies in place because this program requires a very high degree of self-motivation and self-discipline, and everybody needs help with that. If you have backlogged hours, just get them in now. You know, if you've been holding on to them, don't hold on to them. Get them in now, please.
Joel had one more question about, I was thinking about my supervising architect who retired. What would happen if he died, heaven forbid? I think that's an individual issue or question. I don't know, Dawn.
I can tell you it has happened, and it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't good. So it is important to get those hours signed within the time frame. It is unfortunate, and I hate to say this, but there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing that a CALA jurisdiction can do about it. You've got to get that supervising architect to sign off. If that architect had a partner in the firm, perhaps the partner knows enough about your work experience to be able to validate that and sign as the supervisor.
Yeah, I would get a jump on that, Joel. If you have any concerns, I would just get things signed off as soon as you can. So it's all about kind of just being proactive and getting your hours in and getting things put together. Any more questions? Yeah, no, that was just Joel's. Thanks, Joel. If there's any more questions, if anybody has anything else, maybe, oh, Cherise, you're writing something. Okay, we'll give you 1 second. And just to remind everybody, this has been recorded and will be posted online. We have a new webinar page, actually, on our website. So if you're looking for it, I will just put in here. There you go. Oh, thanks, Reese. So if you want to go back and look at all the webinars that we've been hosting over the last little while, I have been posting them online now, as well as the resources that are presented in each of the webinars. So you can go to raic-syllabus.ca/webinars and view everything there.
I'd like to say that if the students, if you as a student would like to have a topic for a webinar that you think the whole student community would benefit from, please let us know. If it's appropriate for a broader public webinar, we'd be glad to entertain it. If it's a particular issue you have in your particular studio, we wouldn't do a webinar on that. But if it's something that the whole student community could benefit from, let us know.
Yeah, we're here to help. We're here to clarify. We're here to support all of the students. So if you have something you want to discuss, something you think would be good for the entire population, we'd love to look at it. We want to make sure that everybody's getting the information that they need. Maria, what is your take on work experience outside of Canada?
Okay. We do not, the syllabus program does not require the student to be working in Canada, but they must be working under the direct supervision of an architect who is licensed to practice in Canada. So, for example, there are Canadian architects who are working in Shanghai, Beijing, Dubai, Jeddah and Riyadh. It's acceptable to work outside of Canada as long as you are working for an architect licensed to practice in one of the 11 jurisdictions in Canada. We cannot accept experience from work experience that was done under an architect who was not licensed to practice in Canada. We have students, for example, who might spend 3 months in Dubai working for one of the Canadian architecture practices. That's fine. That's fine. But if they weren't licensed in Canada, I'm sorry, we can't help you.
Great. Thanks, Don. Great. Okay, so I think that's all the questions now. But again, our emails are right there. If you have any questions that you want to email us about or call me about until Don gets his voice back, feel free to get in contact with us and we'll be happy to answer those questions. Thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for participating in the webinar.
Somebody's written something very big here.
Oh, Aaron. Regarding my earlier question, I think I was trying to make a distinction between eligible working hours versus ineligible working hours, both of which are undertaken working in an architectural office. Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I recently contacted my OAA CALA jurisdiction regarding the allocation of some of my working experience towards the 15 categories. They advised me that some of my experiences are ineligible. For example, working on building condition reports is ineligible. Right. So that was in reference to working full-time on eligible work experience versus ineligible work experience.
I see.
Great. Okay. Now we've got the question. So are you able to answer that, Don?
About the building condition reports?
Just as to whether or not there's an issue of Aaron, for example, working full-time but working some of the time on eligible work experience and some of the time on ineligible work experience.
Well, for me, if the work falls within one of the 15 categories, I consider it to be eligible. Now, whether building condition reports is ineligible or eligible, it depends on whether or not that work falls within one of the 15 categories. It isn't functional programming, it isn't conceptual design, and it isn't design development. So in that sense, it does not fall within the 15 categories. That's really all I can say.
So the question is whether or not he's working a minimum of 20 hours a week in an office. Is the 20 hours considered, is he okay as far as our requirements for working in an office if not all 20 hours is eligible work experience?
As far as I'm concerned, as long as you're working in an office for an average minimum of 20 hours a week, that is acceptable employment.
So I hope that answered it, Aaron. And if you do have further questions about it, feel free to email us or call me. and we'll get that answered or figure that out with you, okay? All right, so I think we're going to sign off now, but thank you so much, everybody, for participating in the webinar. We really appreciate the support and everybody being in the program. And if you have any further questions, don't be afraid to contact us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.